Hey YNR fans! Waving hand, welcome to YNR Trends, your go-to spot for the juiciest Young and the Restless updates, shocking spoilers, and all the drama you can't stop talking about. From surprise returns to scandalous twists, we break it all down for you, every day. So grab your coffee, hit that subscribe button, and let's dive right into Genoa City's hottest gossip. Summer had never felt so overwhelmed. The evening at the Abbott mansion had been meant to be calm, just a family dinner with Harrison playing in the living room while Kyle and Jack discussed business in the study. But Claire's arrival had changed everything. There was a storm brewing inside of her, the kind of rage that could no longer be hidden under polite smiles and soft words. Claire had tried to play the role of the reformed woman, someone who was determined to rebuild trust after the horrors of her past, but underneath, jealousy and resentment churned. The sight of Summer so close to Kyle, laughing with Harrison, looking like the perfect picture of family, was unbearable to Claire. It made her feel like she was on the outside of something she would never truly be allowed into, no matter how hard she tried. Every giggle from Summer felt like mockery, every glance from Kyle toward his wife like a dagger in Claire's chest. She told herself to calm down, that she wasn't going to let emotions dictate her actions again, but then Summer turned and placed a soft kiss on Kyle's cheek, and the mask slipped. Claire's pulse raced, and before she even realized it, her feet were carrying her across the room. Summer barely had time to register the intensity in Claire's eyes before a sharp blow connected with her temple. The sound was sickening, flesh against flesh, a thud of body collapsing to the hardwood floor. Summer let out a gasp that never fully formed into a scream before her world went black, her body going limp as she crumpled unconscious at Claire's feet. For a moment, silence ruled the room. Claire's chest heaved as she stood over Summer, her hands trembling, unsure whether it was from adrenaline or guilt. Harrison, who had been building towers with his blocks just feet away, looked up. At first, confusion flickered in his innocent eyes, but then he saw Summer lying so still, and panic struck him like lightning. His lips trembled, his chest tightened, and tears welled up until they spilled over. "Mommy! Mommy, wake up!" Harrison cried, his small voice breaking in terror. He rushed to Summer's side, tugging at her arm, shaking her gently, his little body overwhelmed with fear. Claire stepped back, the reality of what she had done crashing into her. Harrison's sobs pierced the room, each one slicing into her conscience. She hadn't thought of him, hadn't thought what her outburst would mean for the child who adored Summer like a mother. Harrison's wails grew louder, his voice high and broken. "Daddy! Daddy, help! Mommy's not moving!" The desperation in his tone made Claire freeze, her face pale, her body rooted to the floor as if the house itself were holding her prisoner. In the study, Kyle's head jerked up at the sound of his son's cries. The panic in Harrison's voice was unlike anything he had ever heard before, filled with a raw terror that no parent could ignore. Kyle dropped the papers he had been holding and sprinted toward the living room, Jack following close behind. The moment Kyle's eyes fell on Summer lying unconscious on the ground, his heart nearly stopped. He dropped to his knees beside her, his hands trembling as he brushed her hair back from her face. "Summer! Summer, wake up!" His voice cracked with fear, his world narrowing down to the sight of her motionless body. Harrison clung to his father's arm, sobbing uncontrollably. "Daddy, she won't wake up. Please, please make her wake up." His words came out in broken gasps, his cheeks wet with tears, his little body shaking. Kyle pulled him close with one arm while desperately trying to rouse Summer with the other. "It's okay, buddy, I've got her. She's going to be okay. Daddy's here." But the fear in Kyle's own eyes betrayed the reassurance in his voice. Jack crouched down beside them, his face grim, his mind racing with questions. Then his gaze shifted to Claire, who stood frozen in place, her fists clenched at her sides, her expression a twisted mixture of defiance and regret. "Claire," Jack's voice was low, dangerous, filled with disappointment and disbelief. "What did you do?" Claire opened her mouth, but no words came out. She tried to swallow the lump in her throat, but all she managed was a whisper, "I didn't mean to, it just happened." She kept, but Jack cut her off, his tone sharp. "You attacked her. My grandson had to watch you hurt the woman he calls his mother." His eyes narrowed, the weight of his anger almost crushing. Claire felt small under his stare, her shoulders trembling. Kyle didn't even look at her. His entire focus was on Summer and Harrison. "Call 911, he barked, his voice sharp with urgency. Jack immediately pulled his phone from his pocket, his hand steady despite the fury running through him. Harrison buried his face in Kyle's chest, his sobs muffled but still heartbreaking. Kyle kissed the top of his son's head, whispering, "I've got you, buddy, I've got you. Mommy's strong. She's going to wake up." He kept repeating it, more for himself than for Harrison, as he gently stroked Summer's face. Claire took a shaky step forward, as if she wanted to explain, maybe even help, but Kyle shot her a look so venomous it froze her in her tracks. His jaw was clenched, his eyes burning with fury. "Stay back," he growled. "Don't you dare come near her or my son." The venom in his tone made Claire flinch. For the first time, she saw the full consequences of her actions, not just in Summer lying unconscious, but in the way Harrison clung to his father, terrified, broken, inconsolable. She had taken from him a sense of safety, shattered his trust, and that realization crushed her. Harrison whimpered again, his small hands clutching Kyle's shirt tightly. "Daddy, don't let her die. Please don't let Mommy die." The words, so pure and desperate, ripped through Kyle's heart. He kissed his son's hair, whispering shakily, "She won't, Harrison. I promise, she won't." But deep inside, he was terrified, because Summer still wasn't moving. The living room of the Newman Ranch, a space typically defined by its imposing scale and the cold gleam of expensive surfaces, was suddenly and violently transformed into a crucible of human emotion. The air, which usually hung heavy with the weight of corporate machinations and familial tension, was now thick with the visceral, immediate horror of physical violence. It began not with a shout, but with a terrible, focused silence from Claire Grace, a silence that was more alarming than any outburst could have been. The object of her fixed, unnerving stare was Summer Newman, who, in her righteous anger and protective fury over her mother's suffering, had become the final catalyst for a psyche fracturing beyond its limits. The words exchanged were sharp, accusations flying like shards of glass, each one lacerating the fragile remains of Claire's constructed identity. But it was Summer's specific invocation of the pain Claire had caused, the direct linking of her to the torment of Phyllis, that seemed to sever the last taut thread of Claire's composure. The attack was not a wild, flailing thing. It was horrifying in its precision. There was a calculated ferocity in the way Claire moved, a strength born of pure, unadulterated adrenaline and a deep, festering madness. She lunged, not as a woman, but as a force of nature, a dam breaking after a lifetime of pressure. The struggle was brief and brutally one-sided. Summer, fueled by passion but unprepared for the sheer animalistic power of her opponent, was quickly overpowered. The sound that followed was the most sickening element of the entire affair, the dull, unforgiving crack of Summer's head meeting the unyielding edge of a marble coffee table. It was a sound that seemed to suck all other noise from the room, a single, definitive thud that signaled the end of consciousness and the beginning of a nightmare. Summer's body went limp, a marionette with its strings cut, collapsing into a disturbingly still heap on the floor. The vibrant, fiery energy that defined her was extinguished in an instant, leaving behind a terrifyingly inert form. In the stunned silence that followed, a vacuum where even time seemed to hesitate, the scene found its sole audience, Harrison Locke. The little boy had been a silent witness, a small shadow in the grandeur of the adult world, and his eyes, wide with the uncomprehending terror only a child can feel, had absorbed every frame of the violence. His mother, the center of his universe, the source of all comfort and safety, had just committed an act of terrifying brutality. And the woman he knew as his aunt, a vibrant and loving presence in his life, was now lying motionless on the floor, a trickle of blood stark against her pale skin. The cognitive dissonance was too vast, too catastrophic for a young mind to process. The world, as he knew it, had not just tilted, it had shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. His reaction was not immediate. For a heartbeat, he simply stood frozen, his brain struggling to reconcile the unimaginable sight before him with any known reality. Then, the dam within him broke. A high, thin wail of pure anguish escaped his lips, a sound so raw and desolate that it seemed to give voice to the horror that the room itself could not articulate. This was not a cry for attention or a tantrum over a scraped knee, this was the sound of a soul being fractured. Great, heaving sobs racked his small frame, tears streaming down his cheeks in an uncontrollable torrent. His whole body trembled, consumed by a grief and fear so profound it was physical. He was utterly lost, adrift in a sea of terror with no anchor, his mother transformed into a monster before his eyes and his aunt lying dead, for all he knew, at her feet. It was this sound, the utterly broken weeping of his grandson, that finally pierced the fog of Victor Newman's own shock. The patriarch, a man who had faced down corporate raids, assassination attempts, and every manner of betrayal, was for a moment rendered motionless by the domestic savagery unfolding in his own home. But the child's pain was a call to action that transcended his own stunned disbelief. He moved to Harrison, his own heart hammering against his ribs, trying to gather the boy up, to shield him from the horrific sight, to offer some meager comfort against an incomprehensible trauma. But the damage was irrevocable. Harrison had seen the monster, and the image was now permanently seared into his memory. Amidst this chaos, amidst the crying of the child and the stunned silence of the adults, stood Kyle Abbott. He had come to the ranch seeking answers, driven by a tumultuous mix of anger towards Claire for her deception and a gnawing, unresolved concern for the woman who had once been his wife, Summer. He had expected a confrontation, harsh words, perhaps even the cold, calculating wrath of Victor Newman. He could never have prepared for the scene that greeted him. The door swung open to reveal not a tense standoff, but a crime scene. His ex-wife, the mother of his child, lay unconscious and bleeding on the floor. His son was screaming in abject terror, his small face a mask of devastation. And Claire stood over it all, her hands still poised, her expression not one of remorse, but of a strange, vacant dissociation, as if she herself were only just returning to the reality of what her body had done. Kyle's world narrowed to a single, horrifying point. The complex web of their history, their love, their divorce, their co-parenting, their recent tentative steps toward reconciliation, vanished. In that moment, she was not his ex-wife or his co-parent, she was simply Summer, the woman he had loved for much of his life, lying broken and vulnerable. And Harrison was his son, his most sacred responsibility, whose cries were a physical blow to Kyle's heart. The professional demeanor he so often clung to, the Abbott polish and poise, evaporated. What surged up in its place was a primal, protective fury so intense it was dizzying. He didn't shout. He didn't rush to Summer's side immediately, though every fiber of his being screamed to do so. His first, overwhelming instinct was for his child. He pushed past the stunned figures of Victor and a paralyzed Nikki, his focus laser-like on Harrison. He scooped the hysterical boy into his arms, holding him tightly, trying to absorb the tremors that racked his small body, murmuring desperate, soothing words that felt utterly inadequate against the tsunami of the child's fear. "Daddy's here, I've got you," he whispered, his own voice cracking with emotion. Feeling his father's arms around him, Harrison's cries only intensified, the safe harbor finally arriving after the ship had already been destroyed. He buried his face in Kyle's neck, his sobs becoming the only soundtrack to the nightmare. Holding his son, Kyle's eyes finally swept the room, taking in the full, grotesque picture. He saw Summer, still and pale. He saw Claire, detached and eerie in her calm. He saw the blood. And the tears that had been building in his own eyes, tears of fear, of rage, of utter helplessness, now broke free. They were not the quiet tears of sadness, but the hot, angry tears of a man whose world has been violently upended. He held his sobbing son and wept openly, his own body shaking. It was a complete and total breakdown, a moment of pure, unvarnished vulnerability. The strong, often arrogant Kyle Abbott was brought to his knees not by a business rival, but by the sight of his family shattered. The practicalities of the situation slowly began to penetrate the haze of his grief. Still clutching Harrison, who was now clinging to him as if for life itself, Kyle fumbled for his phone. His hands were trembling so violently he could barely navigate the screen. The act of calling for help felt both desperately urgent and utterly surreal. He had to make the call that would make this nightmare official, that would bring strangers into this intimate horror, that would set in motion a chain of events from which there would be no return. When the dispatcher's voice, calm and professional, came on the line, Kyle's own voice was barely recognizable, choked with tears and panic. "I need an ambulance, now, at the Newman Ranch," he stammered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "She's unconscious, there's blood. She attacked her. Claire attacked Summer." Saying the words aloud made them real, solidifying the surreal horror into concrete fact. He was reporting a crime, and the perpetrator was standing right there. The call was short, fragmented, a masterpiece of suppressed hysteria. He ended the call and simply stood there, phone in hand, holding his son, his tears still falling onto the boy's hair. The YNR shock of the moment was not just the violence itself, which was brutal and unprecedented, but the complete emotional evisceration of its characters. This was not a plot point, it was an earthquake that measured off the Richter scale of human drama. The aftermath of that phone call was a landscape of profound and irreversible change. The emotional fallout was immediate and radioactive. For Harrison, the trauma was foundational. The image of his mother as a violent aggressor and of his aunt as a victim would require years of therapy to even begin to process, fundamentally altering his perception of safety, family, and love. The trust was broken in the most violent way imaginable. For Kyle, the event drew a permanent line in the sand. Any lingering sympathy or complicated feeling he might have harbored for Claire evaporated in the face of her actions. She had not just harmed Summer, she had psychologically destroyed his son. This act created a unified front between him and Summer, bound now not just by their shared history or their child, but by shared victimhood at the hands of the same person. His breakdown and the raw, unfiltered fear he displayed forged a new layer of intimacy between them, one built in the crucible of shared trauma. For Claire, the act was likely a perverse form of catharsis, the final, violent expulsion of the poison within her, but it came at the ultimate cost. She had sacrificed the last vestiges of her humanity and any chance of redemption in the eyes of the Newman family and the world. She was no longer a troubled niece or a victim of her upbringing, she was now unequivocally the villain. For the Newman family as a whole, the event was a stain on their legacy, a violent outburst that could not be hushed up or settled with money or power. It was a public scandal of the most gruesome kind, but more importantly, it was a private hell that would leave every member of the family, especially Victor, questioning their role in creating the environment that allowed such a monster to flourish in their midst. The shockwaves of that single, violent moment in the Newman living room would reverberate for years, a dark chapter written in blood and tears, forever altering the emotional DNA of Genoa City. It was a moment where pretense fell away, and what was left was the raw, ugly, devastating truth of human nature pushed to its breaking point.